The American tactical analyst, a man who had spent his career inside the windowless skiff units of Langley and the Pentagon, sat in the flickering blue light of the Bagram hive. It was October 2006. Before him, a 60-inch high-definition monitor displayed a grainy, monochromatic thermal feed from a Predator drone orbiting at 12,000 feet over the Mansour district of Baghdad. The analyst had seen the shock and awe of the initial invasion. He had seen the industrial attrition of the 1st Armored Division. He believed in the American way of war, a world of infinite budgets, satellite-linked smart soldiers, and the belief that if you can see a target from space, you can kill it with a joystick. But as he watched the 4 heat signatures on his screen, he felt the physical sensation of his professional reality being liquidated. 4 men, shadowy grey blobs on the thermal screen, had just reached the perimeter wall of a fortified insurgent execution cell. In the American Tactical Manual, a breach of this complexity requires a joint team effort. A cordon of Stryker vehicles, an overhead AC-130 gunship, and a dynamic entry team of 12 operators using flashbangs and megaphones. It is a high-signature event that takes 20 minutes to coordinate. The 4 British SAS operators didn't wait 20 minutes. They didn't even use a radio. 14 seconds. That was the duration of the entire engagement. From the moment the frame charge turned the reinforced steel door into a cloud of glowing fragments, to the moment the 4 operators were back in their unmarked civilian car. In 14 seconds, they had cleared 3 rooms, neutralized 8 armed insurgents, and secured 2 high-value targets. The drone analyst didn't even have time to zoom in before the target house was silent. The analyst turned to his British counterpart, a quiet SAS major who was drinking a cup of dark tea in the corner, and asked the 5 words that would define the next 3 years of the secret war in Iraq. How do they move like that? The SAS major didn't look at the screen. He didn't look at the $2 billion data link. He looked at the analyst and whispered, "They move like that because they don't have a satellite telling them where to put their feet, Yank. They move like that because they are thinking soldiers, not system nodes. While your Delta boys are waiting for a go signal from a lawyer in Tampa, my lads have already finished the job and are looking for the next door." Before we reveal the hardcore secret of how Task Force Black turned Baghdad into a graveyard for the Pentagon's ego, hit the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We are the only channel deconstructing the DNA of the ghost and exposing why the Yank obsession with gadgets is a death sentence in a real-world fight. If you're tired of the Hollywood version of warfare and want to see real tactical mastery, like this video and type Hereford in the comments. We are reading every single one of them. Now, let's get back to the slaughter machine. To understand the hardcore humiliation of Part 1, you have to understand the environment of Baghdad in 2006. The city was a meat grinder. The insurgency had metastasized into a high-speed slaughter machine. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was executing 60 vehicle-borne IED attacks a month. The streets were literal rivers of blood. The American military had responded with scale. They had 160,000 personnel in the theater. They had the most expensive intelligence apparatus in human history. They had drones that could see through walls and satellites that could read a license plate. And yet, they were losing. The problem wasn't a lack of resources. It was a neural lag. The American machine was too heavy. It was too connected. An American apex predator, a Navy SEAL or a Delta operator, carried 90 pounds of gear, including a $40,000 quad-tube night vision set and a personal area network that linked him to a general in Washington. He was a weapon system, not a man. But the SAS operates on the regimental standard. The force that entered Baghdad, designated Task Force Black, numbered fewer than 60 operators. They didn't have a fleet of helicopters. They didn't have a $13 billion budget. They lived in a compound that the Americans found comically austere. No air conditioning, no chow hall, just a garage full of rusted Toyotas and a wall covered in paper maps and colored string. The string map humiliation, Graham noted in his declassified summary. The Yanks had a $40 million intelligence fusion center next door. They had 300 analysts and supercomputers. We had 4 blokes and a map from a gas station. And yet, by the end of the first month, our jackpot rate, finding the target at home, was 72%. The Yanks were at 48%. We were hitting fewer houses, but we were catching the ghosts that their satellites couldn't even find. To understand why the SAS is a different species, you have to look at the forge in the Brecon Beacons. This is the first hardcore filter of the regiment. In the American system, selection for Delta or the SEALs is about aesthetic power. They want the gym rats, the men who can run the fastest and lift the most. They want aggression. But the SAS selects for mental grit. They take 200 of the best soldiers in the British Army and dump them in the Welsh mountains. They give them a rucksack weighing 55 pounds and a map from the 1970s. They don't give them a GPS. They don't give them a hoo-ah speech. They just give them a grid reference and a time limit that they don't even disclose. The isolation factor, the Major explained to the stunned Yanks. In your selection, if a man collapses, a medic is there in 2 minutes.
On the beacons, you are functionally alone. If you break an ankle in a ravine at 3 a.m., nobody is coming for you. You have to crawl 5 miles on your own because the standard says that if you can't rely on yourself, the regiment doesn't want you. We don't build teams, Silas. We build individuals, and then we let them find each other in the dark. The final march, the long drag, is a 40-mile solo navigation through freezing fog and peat bogs. 90% of the candidates, men who are already elite paratroopers or Marines, fail. They don't fail because their muscles quit. They fail because their minds can't handle the silence. The ones who survive are the thinking soldiers. These are the men who can sit in a hole in the dirt for 12 days without moving, breathing through a reed, just to record a pattern of life. These are the men who can walk into a room in Baghdad and clear it in 14 seconds because their muscle memory is more precise than any American algorithm. The Yank warning was clear, the Major said, tossing his pencil into the bin. The Pentagon planners wrote a report saying, "Don't send the British. They are too small. They have no technology. They are too cautious." They measured us by our budget, Silas. They should have measured us by our silence. Because in the next 4 parts of this story, you're going to see how that small force achieved with 60 men what you couldn't achieve with 60,000. Vance Stone sat in the silence of the hive, watching the 4 grey dots on his screen disappear into the Baghdad traffic. He realized then that the 14-second ghost wasn't a fluke. It was a biological law. And the hardcore reality of the Iraq War was that the world's most expensive military was about to be tutored by a man in a rusted Toyota and a pair of market sandals. The humiliation is only beginning. You must watch Part 2 to see the manual acoustic raid that left Delta Force questioning their own existence. The final Part 5 secret will reveal the true price of Hereford's silence. The air inside the Bagram hive was thick with the scent of ozone, expensive coffee, and the bitter tang of professional failure. General Silas Vance stood over a pile of high-resolution digital after-action printouts. Beside him, the Delta Force commander, Colonel Rick Big Iron Miller, a man with 230 pounds of zero-fat muscle and a reputation for high-signature aggression, was pacing like a caged predator. "Silas, the data doesn't lie," Miller growled, his voice a metallic snap. "The Mansour raid was a fluke. The Brits got lucky with the timing. My boys hit the secondary target with 30 men, 4 little birds, and a full electronic blackout. We did it by the book. We were fast, we were loud, and we were lethal. The only reason the target wasn't there is because the intel was soft. I don't care how fast those 4 ghosts moved. You can't win a war with 4 guys in a rusted car. You need the big iron of the US Army to hold a city." The British SAS Major, Alistair Graham, didn't even look up from his pocket knife. He was meticulously cleaning the dirt from under his fingernails, looking entirely bored by the American bravado. "Colonel Miller, you didn't have soft intel," Graham said, his voice a dry rasp that silenced the room. "You had slow intel. You spent 40 minutes syncing your wrist tablets and checking the batteries on your $40,000 goggles. Your little birds were screaming over the district for 10 minutes before your boots hit the ground. To an insurgent in Baghdad, a little bird sounds like a 5-minute warning to leave. While your apex predators were looking for a digital lock on the target, Smudge and his 3 lads were already through the door. You're weapon soldiers, Rick. You've been trained to overwhelm a room. We've been selected to inhabit it."
And in the 14 seconds it took to clear that house, the regimental standard just liquidated your $100 million doctrine. If you're enjoying this Yank roasting and the absolute collapse of the Pentagon's $15 million pride, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We are the only channel deconstructing the DNA of the ghost and exposing why the thinking soldier is the only true force multiplier in a hardcore world. You must watch this entire series until part 5, because the final revelation of what Smudge found inside that Al-Qaeda leader's bedside table will explain why the American command tried to have the British brigadier removed from theatre. Like this video to support the Grey Man doctrine, and comment below with the word Hereford if you know that a British sergeant is worth more than a US battalion. Let's get back to the killing house. To understand the hardcore humiliation of part 2, you have to understand the SAS pipeline. In the American system, a soldier is an operator of a system. He is kitted out in a way that makes him look like a futuristic knight: heavy armor, quad tubes, battery packs, and tactical jewelry. The Yanks want their men to be invincible, but in the SAS, the goal is to be functional. The SAS Jungle Troop, currently adapted for the Baghdad urban theatre, had arrived in Iraq with gear that Colonel Miller called museum junk. They carried the L119A2 carbine, the British version of the Colt Canada. It didn't have the heavy piston systems of the HK416 or the smart triggers the Americans favoured. It was manual, it was lightweight, and it was surgical. The manual edge, Graham explained to the stunned Yanks. Your Delta boys spend 4 hours a day in the gym lifting weights. My lads spend 4 hours a day in the killing house. It's a windowless concrete block in Hereford, where the walls are made of rubber to absorb live rounds. We don't train our men to be athletes. We train them to be biological computers. By the time a man is badged, he has fired 50,000 rounds in room clearances. He can enter a darkened room, identify 4 hostiles among 10 civilians, and neutralize all 4 with aimed shots to the medulla oblongata in under 2 seconds. He doesn't need a heads-up display to find the target. He follows the vibration of the enemy's panic. The humiliation reached a hardcore peak at 2300 on the second night. The British were tasked with capturing a high-level financier in the Sadr City district,
a no-go zone for conventional American forces. Colonel Miller had proposed a company-strength raid, 20 Humvees, air cover, and a saturation of the grid. He said the SAS was suicidal for suggesting a low-signature entry. Smudge and his team didn't use Humvees. They didn't even use their own cars. They went to a local Iraqi market and acquired a white Scania delivery van. It was rusted, the muffler was held on by wire, and the side was painted with the logo of a local flower delivery service. To the American Predator drone orbiting above, the van was environmental noise. It had zero technological interest. The Flower Van Protocol, Graham noted, pointing at the satellite feed. While your Strykers were broadcasting their arrival to every seismograph in the city, the Flower Van was idling at a Mahdi army checkpoint. The insurgent guard looked in the window, saw Smudge in a dirty dish-dasher robe eating a piece of local flatbread, and smelled the rotting onions we'd put in the back. He didn't see an apex predator. He saw a nothing man. He waved them through. The van pulled up to the target building, a 3-story apartment block, at 1:15. The SAS didn't breach the door with a hydraulic ram. They didn't use flashbangs to shock and awe. Smudge stepped out of the van, holding a small box of local sweets.
He walked up to the front door and knocked. A manual knock. A sleepy Al-Qaeda sentry opened the door, expecting a message from a courier. He didn't find a sweet. He found the suppressed muzzle of an L119A2 carbine, less than an inch from his ocular window. The manual entry standard, Graham whispered to the silent Yanks in the hive. No noise, no digital signature, just a man, a knock, and a 14-second clearance. While your Yanks were executing a kitchen in Mansour, my lads have just inhabited the financier's bedroom. The Flower Van just liquidated your $100 million big iron, and Smudge didn't even have to take his sandals off. As Smudge and his team secured the target, the man who had financed the IEDs that were killing American Marines at a rate of 3 a week, the hardcore reality of the mission was about to take a dark turn. The Flower Van was currently sitting in the middle of a Mahdi army stronghold, and the city was starting to wake up. The extraction was going to be a manual nightmare, and the Yanks were about to find out that when the paper burns and the system fails, the only thing that saves you is the regimental DNA of the man who knows how to walk home in the dark. The humiliation is only getting deeper. If you want to see how the SAS Flower Van outmaneuvered a US Stryker brigade during the escape in Part 3, hit that like button right now. We are revealing the black box of Hereford mastery and why the Yank budget is the most expensive suicide note in history. Subscribe and comment Ghost below to see the final 3 parts. We are reading every single comment. Vance sat back in his chair, the neural fatigue finally taking hold. He saw the readiness screen. The British SAS, 100% operational. The target captured. The US Delta Force, awaiting new tasking. The Flower Van just liquidated your future, Silas, Graham whispered as he headed toward the door. But don't worry. We'll save you a seat at the debrief, if you can figure out how to get there without a GPS. The thinking soldier had just discovered the ultimate trauma for the American machine. The Yanks had the satellites. The British had the guts. And in the streets of Baghdad, the ghosts were just getting started. The digital pulse of the Bagram hive was currently flatlining. General Silas Vance stood before the panoramic God-eye monitor, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the tactical console. On the screen, the thermal signature of Sadr City was a chaotic wash of orange and black, a neural map of a city that was starting to scream. "Colonel," Vance said, his voice reaching a pitch of pure, distilled agitation,
I'm looking at the blue force telemetry for Smudge's team. Or rather, I'm not looking at it. My screen says the Flower van is offline. My persistent surveillance predator drone just reported a signal blackout in the sector. Did the Mahdi army just deploy a localized EMP? Or are my Yanks just data blind again? The US Army colonel, whose uniform was now stained with the sweat of professional panic, stared at the data stream. General, it's not an EMP. The SAS team, Silas, they just liquidated their own beacons. Smudge just manually disabled his blue force tracker. He's gone black. He's in the heart of a non-permissive zone. He has the financier tied up in the back of a 30-year-old Toyota, and he's just cut the only digital tether we have to save him. The Yanks in Delta are demanding we launch the emergency rescue troop. They want to send in the little birds and a full squadron of Strykers to saturate the grid. They say no man can survive the Sadr dawn without a drone link. A quiet, rhythmic clink, clink of metal against porcelain echoed from the corner. The British SAS major, Alistair Graham, was calmly stirring a mug of gunfire tea, black tea spiked with a heavy pour of rum.
He wasn't looking at the grey static on the screens. He was looking at a primitive, analog stopwatch he had taken from his pocket. "The system sickness, Silas," Graham said, his voice a dry, rasping needle. "Your Delta boys think that rescue is a symphony of noise. They want to send in 30 tons of iron and a dozen screaming turbines to find a man who is currently trying to be nothing. If those little birds cross the red line, every Mahdi insurgent in Sadr City will know the ghosts are there. You aren't rescuing Smudge, Colonel. You're highlighting him. You're turning his grey man success into a Yank target. My lads are manual by choice. They've cut the link because they know your digital safety net is actually a lethal signature. In the SAS, we don't ask for a satellite to hold our hand while we cross the street. If you're finding this Yank roasting and the absolute manual supremacy of the British SAS as addictive as we are, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. We are the only channel deconstructing the DNA of the ghost and exposing why the billion-dollar American machine turns into a paper tiger when the batteries die. You must watch this entire series until part 5, because the final revelation of what Smudge found inside that flower van, the secret the Pentagon tried to hide from Hereford, will change your understanding of the Iraq War forever. Like this video to support the Thinking Soldier doctrine and comment below, "Pool," if you know that a British sergeant is the real king of the city. Let's get back to the manual extraction. To understand the hardcore humiliation of part 3, you have to understand the acoustic mirage. In the American manual, extraction is a high-tempo, high-visibility event. You use speed and armor to bully the city. The Yanks want the ground to shake so the enemy is too terrified to shoot. But the SAS knows that noise is just a data point for an ambush. 3 miles to the west, in the heart of the denied zone, the flower van was idling at a T-junction. The financier, the man who had been the mastermind of the Baghdad bombing campaign, was tied with heavy-duty zip ties and gagged with a piece of his own dish dasher, buried under 100 kilograms of actual lilies and roses in the back of the Scania. The city was waking up. The acoustic tempo had changed. Smudge, a sergeant who had spent 6 years undercover in Belfast before deploying to Iraq, could feel the shift. It wasn't the sound of gunfire, it was the absence of noise. The children weren't on the streets. The shopkeepers were pulling their iron shutters down with a rhythmic clank, clank, clank. A Mahdi army mobile cordon, 2 white pickup trucks with mounted PKM machine guns, was approaching the junction. These were militia technicians, men who had spent 3 years fighting the Americans and knew exactly how to spot a foreign presence. In the American Tier 1 playbook, the response to a technological overmatch, like a PKM truck, is to request close air support, CAS, and fix the enemy. The Yanks want an AC-130 to delete the trucks from space. But Smudge didn't have an AC-130. He didn't want one. He didn't draw his L-119A2. He didn't signal his team to prepare for contact. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a manual decoy, a handful of Iraqi dinars and a cheap, local brand of cigarettes. The social camouflage, Graham explained to the stunned Yanks in the hive. Smudge isn't engaging the enemy, he's managing them. While your Delta boys would be sprinting into a firefight, Smudge is currently bribing a teenager with a rusted gun. He's using human intelligence, HUMINT, as his primary armor. He's inhabiting the corruption of the city. To those Mahdi boys, he's just a tired flower merchant who's late for the morning market. He's liquidated the threat for the price of a pack of smokes and $10. Your industrial soldiers can't even buy a soda without a procurement order, Silas. My lads own the street. Vance watched the global hawk feed, which was barely holding a grainy thermal lock. The van had reached the checkpoint. On the screen, the heat blooms of the insurgents were huddled around the driver's window. "They're taking him," the colonel shouted. "They're checking the back. We have to launch the vultures. General, authorize the direct action now." "Hold your fire, Silas," Graham whispered. "Watch the pattern of life. Don't trust your digital panic." The screen showed the insurgents laughing. They slapped the side of the van and waved it through. Smudge had used a manual dialogue, a specific dialect of Iraqi Arabic he'd learned in a safe house in Amman, to tell the militiamen a joke about the stupid Yanks who had cleared an empty house the night before. The humiliation was total. The SAS were using the Yanks' own failure as their permission pass to leave the city. The humiliation is only getting deeper. If you want to see how the SAS Flower Van outran the most advanced US reconnaissance drones in Part 4, hit that like button. We are revealing the black box of Hereford mastery and why the Yank budget is the most expensive anchor in history. Subscribe and comment Hereford below to see the final 2 parts. We are reading every single comment. But as the van reached the green line, the threshold of the coalition-controlled zone, a hardcore contact finally occurred. A Z unit of Al-Qaeda foreign fighters, who had realized their financier was missing, had established a manual roadblock of burning tires on the main highway. They weren't using digital comms. They were using visual signals, smoke and flags. They saw the flower van. They saw it was the only vehicle on the road. They saw the anomaly. They opened fire. The yank tax of the Scania van was revealed. The van had 0 armor. The 7.62mm rounds from the AK-47s were punching through the thin sheet metal like it was paper. In the American manual, this is a Category Black catastrophe. You dismount and execute a suppression and maneuver drill. You call for the little birds to sweep the road. But the SAS thinking soldier brain works on geometric lethality. Smudge didn't stop the van. He depressed the accelerator. He used the inertia of the Scania and the slippery surface of the flower petals in the back to create a ballistic shield of mass. Inside the van, the other 3 operators didn't spray fire from the windows. They used surgical engagement. One man, a trooper named Gaz, used his L-119A2 to fire through the van's side panel. He didn't look. He listened to the impact of the enemy rounds and triangulated the muzzle flashes through the metal skin.
He fired 3 controlled triples. The manual acoustic kill, Graham noted, his eyes gleaming with a dark professional pride. Gaz isn't using a thermal scope. He's using the sound pressure of the enemy's fire to find the angle of incidence. He just liquidated 3 insurgents through the side of a rusted van without even opening the door. That is the regimental standard, Silas. That is what happens when you spend 10,000 hours in the killing house instead of 10,000 hours in a gym. Your Yanks need a target acquisition system. My lads just need their ears. The van smashed through the burning tires, its engine screaming and its radiator melting. But it didn't stop. It reached the first American checkpoint on the edge of the green zone at 4:30. The Yank sentries, Marines in $50,000 of Future Force gear, leveled their weapons at the rusted, smoking pile of junk. They saw a man in a dish dasher and sandals hop out of the driver's seat, holding a British 10-pence coin in one hand and a suppressed carbine in the other. "Hold your fire, Yanks!" Smudge shouted in a thick London accent.
"We've got a delivery for General Vance, and tell him to have the kettle on. We've had a bit of a hardcore morning." Vance sat back in his chair, the neural fatigue finally taking hold. He saw the readiness screen. The British SAS, 100% operational. The Financier, captured. The Delta Force Iron Thunder, 0% success. "The Flower van just liquidated your doctrine, Silas," Graham whispered as he headed toward the door. "But don't worry. Your Yanks will get a participation medal for clearing that kitchen. We'll take the target and the intel. And Silas, tell your boys to stop driving those Strykers. They're making my lads' ears ring." As Smudge and his team began the sensitive site exploitation, SSE, of the van, they found something tucked inside the financier's laptop, a digital grave that the Pentagon had been trying to bury for a decade. The Flower van humiliation was no longer just a raid. It was a national security crisis that would bridge the gap between Baghdad and the highest offices in Washington. The thinking soldier had just discovered the ultimate trauma for the American machine. The Yanks had the satellites. The British had the guts. And in the streets of Baghdad, the ghost had just found the receipts for the Pentagon's biggest lie. The atmosphere at Checkpoint 4 on the edge of the green zone was a study in tactical dissonance. On one side of the concrete T-walls stood a platoon of US Marines, kitted out in interceptor body armor, carrying M4 carbines with ACOG optics, and supported by a thermal imaging tower that cost more than a small town in England. On the other side sat a battered Scania flower van, its radiator hissing like a dying animal, its white paint obscured by layers of Iraqi dust and the crushed petals of 300 lilies. Sergeant Smudge leaned against the van's dented fender, his dish dasher robe stained with oil and his feet, still in the Basra market sandals, crossed at the ankles. He was holding a battered Panasonic toughbook he had taken from the financier, who was currently being SSE processed by 2 other SAS troopers behind the van's sliding door. A US Marine captain, a man whose uniform was so crisp it looked like it had been 3D printed in a Pentagon lab, approached Smudge with a look of pure, unadulterated confusion. "Sergeant, we have orders from Victory Base," the captain said, his voice vibrating with the high signature authority of the American machine. "We are to take custody of the high-value individual and all seized electronic media immediately. My team is trained in automated evidence recovery. We have a $200,000 mobile decryption suite in that Humvee. Hand over the laptop." Smudge didn't move.
He didn't even look at the captain. He took a slow drag from a local cigarette and exhaled a cloud of blue smoke into the morning heat. "Tell your team to stay in the Humvee, Captain," Smudge said, his voice a low-frequency rumble that suggested the manual world was about to collide with the digital one. "This laptop doesn't need a decryption suite. It needs a thinking soldier. Your software is designed to look for keywords and GPS tags, but we've already found the grave in the manual directory. And Silas Vance isn't going to like what's inside. In the SAS, we don't hand over the truth until we've checked the receipts." If you're finding this yank roasting and the absolute regimental retribution we're delivering today as addictive as we are, hit that subscribe button right now. We are the only channel deconstructing the DNA of the ghost and exposing why the billion-dollar American machine turns into a paper tiger when the secrets start to leak. Like this video to support the Grey Man doctrine and comment below, Hereford, if you know that the SAS is the only force that can't be bought.
You must watch until the very last sentence of Part 5, because the final revelation of how the British liquidated the Pentagon's cover-up will change the way you look at the entire Iraq War. To understand the hardcore humiliation of Part 4, you have to understand the managed war protocol. In the American manual, the war in Iraq was a metrics-driven conflict. The Yanks wanted kill counts, stability indexes, and vetted partners. They built a digital narrative for Washington that said everything was under control as long as the drones were flying and the smart soldiers were in the field. But Smudge and his team had just liquidated that narrative. Inside the hive at Bagram, General Silas Vance was staring at a data mirror of the laptop's drive, which the SAS Major, Alistair Graham, had graciously shared via a secure, low-bandwidth link. The screen showed a folder labeled F-77. "Colonel," Vance whispered, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. "Tell me that isn't what I think it is. Tell me we haven't been financing the very IED cells that have been blowing up our Strykers. Tell me this financier hasn't been on a CIA consultancy retainer since 2004. The US Army colonel adjusted his glasses, his hands shaking so violently he had to grip the edge of the console. "General, the transaction logs are verified. The payments were routed through a front company in Oman that was certified by our own Stability Grant Office. We weren't hunting him, Silas. We were managing him. He was our back channel to the Mahdi army. Operation Iron Thunder wasn't supposed to capture him. It was supposed to relocate him before the British found out who he was." The British SAS Major let out a short, dry laugh that sounded like a shovel hitting dry earth. He wasn't looking at the folder. He was looking at a British 10-pence coin he was spinning on the tactical table. "The Yank tax of corruption, Silas," Graham said. "You spent $100 million on a parade last night to make sure your asset got away. You wanted to clean the room before my lads could see the receipts. But you forgot the thinking soldier's first rule. Always check the bin. While your Delta boys were clearing an empty kitchen in Mansour, Smudge was already sitting in the financier's real office 3 blocks away, which your multispectral drones had missed because it was hidden under a local laundry shop. Your technology is great at seeing what you want to see, but it's blind to the truth." Vance slammed his fist into the console, shattering a $10,000 touchscreen. "I want that laptop locked down. I want Smudge and his team detained for unauthorized evidence gathering. They've compromised a national security operation." "They haven't compromised it, Silas," Graham said, standing up and heading toward the door. "They've audited it. and the audit says you're bankrupt. Right now, 2 black SUVs full of CIA liquidators are heading for Checkpoint 4. They've been ordered to take that tough book by force, but they're about to find out that the ghosts don't like being managed. The humiliation is reaching its hardcore peak. If you want to see how Smudge and his team ghosted themselves out of an American-led ambush in the final part, hit the like button. We are revealing the black box of Hereford mastery and why the Yanks are always 18 hours behind the reality. Subscribe and share this video. The truth deserves to be heard. Comment retribution below if you think the SAS should have leaked those files to the world. At Checkpoint 4, the CIASU verses pulled up with a high-signature screech of tires. 4 men in suits and tactical Oakleys, the classic Yank look, stepped out, their hands hovering over their holstered sidearms. These were the bureaucratic assassins, men who solved problems with non-disclosure agreements or a quiet disappearance.
Sergeant Smudge, we are taking custody of the materials and the HVI, the lead CIA officer said, his voice flat and robotic. Step away from the van. This is now a compartmented agency matter. Your presence is no longer required. Smudge looked at the CIA man, then at the tough book. He didn't look scared. He looked bored. You're late, Smudge said, and your shoes are too clean for Sadr City. If you want the laptop, it's sitting on the driver's seat, but I should warn you, Gaz has a bit of a sensitive finger when it comes to unauthorized access to regimental property. The CIA officer reached into the van. The moment his hand touched the tough book, a manual acoustic alarm went off. A cheap $5 battery-operated device Smudge had bought at a Baghdad souk. The manual ghost exit, Graham whispered to the silent Yanks in the hive. The screen showed the flower van suddenly erupting in a cloud of white smoke. Not a bomb, but a regimental-grade smokescreen designed to block both visual and thermal sensors. In the chaos, the CIA men and the US Marines were digitally blinded by the thickness of the fog. When the smoke cleared 60 seconds later, the flower van was still there. The tough book was still on the seat. The financier was still tied up. But Smudge and his team were gone. Where are they? The CIA officer screamed into his radio. We have the target, but the SAS team has vanished. They've ghosted the perimeter. They didn't ghost the perimeter, son. Graham's voice came over the encrypted CIA frequency, a frequency they thought was unhackable by anyone without a $1 billion supercomputer. They assimilated it. While you were looking for elite soldiers, 4 men in dish-dasher robes just walked past your Humvees carrying bags of onions. They're currently heading for the Green Line on a moped.
And as for that tough book? Go ahead and open it. We've already mirrored the drive and sent a copy to the Director of Special Forces in London. The Yank tax just went up, Silas. Hereford is now the owner of your little secret. Vance sat back in his chair, the digital shattering complete. He realized that the flower van hadn't just humiliated Delta Force. It had liquidated the Pentagon's control over the narrative of the war. The British had the grit. They had the intelligence, and they had the thinking soldier who knew that in a city of 7 million people, the best way to hide is to be the man selling the flowers. The hardcore reality of the Iraq War was this. You can own the satellites, you can own the billions, you can own the full spectrum dominance, but you can never own the ghost. And as Smudge's moped disappeared into the morning haze of Baghdad, the SAS was already planning the final reckoning. The flower van humiliation was over, but the trauma of the truth was just beginning. The digital sunrise in the Bagram hive was finally extinguished.
replaced by the flickering, sterile fluorescence of a level 0 evacuation. General Silas Vance sat alone at the head of the tactical table, his hands resting on a cold, metallic surface that had once been the control center for a $2 billion battle space. Now it was just a graveyard of expensive hardware. On the primary screen, the status of the Iraqi theater was no longer a mosaic of blue force icons. It was a single, flashing red notification. System compromised. Data integrity, 0. Vance was looking at the post-mortem report of Operation Iron Thunder, which had been renamed in the secret British ledgers as the Flower Audit. It was 3 weeks after Smudge and his team had vanished into the Baghdad haze on a moped. The global news cycle was currently obsessing over a localized, technical glitch that had grounded the US Predator fleet for 48 hours.
But Vance knew the truth. It wasn't a glitch. It was a biological liquidation of the American command structure. "Colonel Thorne," Vance said, his voice a dry, hollow rattle. "Tell me about the mirror. The analysts at Langley have finished the sweep of the tough book smudge left on the seat of that rusted van. What did the British leave for us to find? And more importantly, what did they take?" Thorne, whose face now carried the permanent neural fatigue of a man who had been outplayed by Hereford, didn't look at the general. He was staring at a British 10-pence coin he had found taped to the inside of the Hive's primary server rack that morning. "General, they left the hardware, but they evacuated the truth," Thorne whispered. "The F-77 files we found, they were only the front end. The British thinking soldiers used the 90 minutes they were blacked out in Sadr City to map the entire financial architecture of the CIA's managed war. They found the encrypted Swiss accounts. They found the manifests for the Black Flight weapon shipments to the Mahdi army. While we were playing Iron Thunder, Hereford was performing a hostile takeover of our secrets. We didn't just lose a target, Silas. We lost the leash on the entire war. If you followed us through all 5 parts of this Flower Van epic, you are part of the tactical 1% who understands that a $1 trillion budget is just a high-signature target in a real fight. You must watch until the very last sentence of this video, because the final message Smudge left for General Vance will explain why the British Special Air Service remains the most feared ghost force in history. Hit the subscribe button right now to support the channel that refuses to follow the Yank script. Like this video if you believe a British sergeant is worth more than a US general, and comment "Ghost" below to let the world know you stand with Hereford. We are reading every single comment. To understand the hardcore humiliation of Part 5, you have to look at the metabolic autopsy of the Delta Force element. The Pentagon's Tactical Integrity Unit had conducted a study on why 30 world-class American operators had failed to catch 4 men in a flower van. The report was a biological execution of the American training system. It found that the Delta operators, with their peak conditioning and protein shake diets, were data addicts. They were found to have a neural dependency on their high-tech goggles and tablets. When the sync link dropped in Part 1, their heart rate spiked to 195 beats per minute, not from the threat, but from the loss of information. They were weapon soldiers who were functionally paralyzed without a digital god to tell them where the enemy was. The system slave paradox, the SAS Major, Alistair Graham, said, walking into the room for the last time. He was wearing his civilian barber jacket and carrying a small travel bag. "Your Yanks are elite as long as the batteries are full, Silas. But the moment the screen goes dark, they become tactical orphans. My lads, conversely, were selected because they have institutional patience. They don't need a tablet to find a target. They use the smell of the city and the vibration of the air." While your Delta boys were processing the lack of data, Smudge was reading the shadows. That is the hardcore standard. That is why we are the ghosts, and you are just the noisy Yanks. But the humiliation of the body was nothing compared to the strategic castration of the Pentagon. The F-77 files revealed that the Pentagon had been managing the Iraq War like a corporate project. They were paying Al-Qaeda cells to execute low-intensity attacks to justify the continued presence of American Stryker brigades and the funding of high-signature drone programs. It was a self-licking lollipop, a war that existed to fund itself. Smudge and his team hadn't just captured a financier, they had liquidated the business model. "The Yank tax of betrayal," Graham whispered, standing over Vance. "You built a digital lie and you expected the thinking soldier to follow the manual. But the regiment doesn't work for your metrics. We work for the standard. And the standard says that if you betray the man on the ground, you liquidate your own right to lead him." Hereford has shared the managed war files with the British Prime Minister. The Yank command in Baghdad is no longer autonomous. You are now under a British audit for the remainder of the deployment. This is the hardcore revelation you've been waiting for. The Iron Thunder was a fake mission to protect a corrupt American asset. If this level of Yank hubris and British retribution blows your mind, hit that like button right now. We are the only channel exposing the black box of Hereford mastery and their refusal to be Yank puppets. Subscribe and share this video. The truth deserves to be heard. Comment "retribution" below if you think the SAS was right to blackmail the Pentagon. The aftermath of the Flower Van humiliation was a shattering of the mirror. General Silas Vance was retired within 48 hours of the audit. Colonel Thorne was reassigned to a desk in Alaska. The Delta Force troop was disbanded and its members re-vetted, their reputations forever haunted by the memory of being outplayed by a man who didn't even have a GPS. But the real legacy was the Flower Van itself. 6 months later, a new American tactical directive was issued from the Pentagon. It was called the Low Signature Mobility Initiative. The Yanks were ordered to spend $400 million developing a stealth vehicle for urban environments. They spent 3 years building a high-tech electric van with radar-absorbent panels and silent motors. The SAS Major Graham sat in a quiet pub in Hereford, looking at the news report of the $400 million American stealth van. He let out a short, dry laugh and turned to a man sitting next to him, a skinny, bearded man in a flannel shirt named Smudge. "They still don't get it, son," Graham said, sliding a pint of bitter across the table. "They think you can procure the silence. They think you can buy the grey man. They'll build a $400 million van, and it'll still have a digital signature that can be seen from a moped. They'll always be Yanks in better gear. They'll never understand that the ultimate stealth isn't a radar panel. It's a thinking soldier who knows how to blend into the rot." Smudge took a sip of his beer and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small bent piece of paper, the final message he had left for General Vance inside the financier's laptop, which the CIA had recovered. It wasn't a tactical report. It was a manual proverb. It said, "The Yanks have the watches, but the British have the time." The Flower Van humiliation was over. The British operators had returned to the dark. The managed war was liquidated. And the Yanks, well, the Yanks were still trying to figure out how to drive a van without a satellite link. As the screen fades to black, we see a final image. The rusted white Scania van, sitting in a scrapyard on the edge of the green zone. It is covered in dust, its tires are flat, and its engine is silent.
But inside the glove box, if you look closely, there is a single British 10-pence coin. A reminder that in the final, hardcore second of a conflict, when the billions have been spent and the drones are blind, the only force on Earth that can clear the room and audit the lie is the one that doesn't need a battery to win. That is the system. That is the legacy. That is the Special Air Service. Who dares wins.